Thank you very much for joining us for this panel discussion. I'm calling it a discussion deliberately because we're not going to, we're not here really to debate whether or not enough is being done by law firms to encourage recruits from diverse backgrounds. What I really want to do is celebrate diversity in the legal sector and to encourage you all to hopefully be inspired and to really sort of push forward with your aspirations to join the legal profession as solicitors. So what I've done is lined up some fantastic guests to share their stories with me. So I'm Chrisnara, by the way, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a careers consultant with BARBRI, but also the editor of a careers and wellbeing website for lawyers called cheekyllittlecareers.com, and I have also worked as a lawyer. And people sort of jokingly say to me, Hisnara, you're sort of the poster girl for diversity, because I was the first person in my family to go to university. I am Bangladeshi by background. I have rheumatoid arthritis, so use a wheelchair for long distances, and I am female. So, I've experienced quite a lot of challenges along the way, which I'm very happy to share with you. But today isn't really about my story. It's really the stories that my guests are going to share. And here this evening, we've got fantastic lineup of speakers. I will just say their names and then hand over to them so they can tell you a little bit about their backgrounds. We've got three lawyers, and then Sunita, who is a expert on all things D&I related, who will keep us, make sure that we don't muddle up all the jargon that often gets bandied about when we talk about D&I. So she'll explain things like allyship, microaggressions, inclusive behaviour, that sort of stuff. So I'm really glad that she's here, but also because she's had first-time experience of supporting law firms through their D&I initiatives and also their policies, etc. But let me start by getting Rodwell to say hello and to introduce himself. So Rodwell's a trainee at Freshfields.
Hey everybody, hopefully you can hear me okay.
We can indeed.
Hi, so my name is Rodwell. 23 years old currently, and I am a fifth seat trainee at Freshfields. My journey into law, to spare you all the details, I was born in Zimbabwe, moved to the UK when I was 4. I grew up in a part of the UK called Derby, and in an area of Derby called Normanton at the beginning. It's not necessarily the fanciest area. And so I studied at school, went to just sort of the best school that I could go to at the time, but it wasn't a private school or anything like that. It was just one of the good schools in the city of Derby. So I was fortunate enough to go to that school. And then I went and studied law at Aston University. And then whilst I was at Aston, I also became a Stephen Lawrence Scholar with Freshfields. So that's where the connection with Freshfields came through. And then now I find myself here. I'm a fifth seat trainee, getting ready to get into my last seat. And then we're going to go on secondment for 6 months.
Great. Roger, well, I'll ask you a bit about your scholarship in a moment. Can I just mention, sorry, it's my fault. I should have mentioned a bit of housekeeping. Can you make sure, audience members, if you can stay on mute, please, until we come to the Q&A at the end? I promise you, you will get a chance to ask my guests some questions. Robert, over to you next.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Robert. Pronouns are he, him. I hope you can hear me. We just got Wi-Fi yesterday in my apartment, so it's all the tech problems in the world I have experienced in the last 24 hours, including my laptop, hence why my camera is looking up my nostrils. But yes, I am currently working as a paralegal in a law firm that specializes in immigration. And in August next year, I'll be starting as a trainee at Skadden, a US firm. My journey into law, I bought a book recently called Squiggly Careers, and that is exactly what my career has been. It has not been linear. I started off as a journalist and worked in various different broadcasters for a number of years and have slowly made the transition into becoming a lawyer. So it's been quite an interesting journey. I'm definitely happy to talk about what it's like to change careers. I think some of the challenges I've definitely experienced, firstly, is just coming in a little bit older than some other people. And then also I am gay, and I think one of the biggest things that, for me at least, when I was coming into the sector, was just how I would be perceived, and whether, you know, you can see from my hair, well, people sometimes call me Jedward. I've got very blonde and quite flamboyant, and those sort of perceptions of what's professional and what's, you know, a lawyer. I was probably erring on looking more like Elle Woods than your typical corporate lawyers. So, you know, I had a lot of preconceptions of what a lawyer was, and I think that definitely held me back for quite a while, but we're getting there eventually.
Thanks. I have to say that I was taken by your hair when I first met Robert via LinkedIn, the power of social media. So that's how we know each other. Amelia, talking of journalists, so you actually work for Channel 4, don't you, but as a lawyer?
Yes, I do. So yeah, I had a bit of a squiggly career as well. So I went to a North London comprehensive, and I did my GCSEs, had started my A-levels, and had just the most awful mental health sort of breakdown. I was really unwell. I spent 9 months in an adolescent unit, sort of getting over that,
Wow.
or getting myself to a point where I could, you know, function. And probably about a month after I left the clinic, I started like an apprenticeship. So this is going back a few years. So it was like a YTS scheme, a youth training scheme, and I happened, just like the first place I interviewed for was actually a subsidiary of News International, and they ran like competitions and promotions for TV and newspapers. And so that is the really weird routes that I managed to get into sort of television, was simply, just by this YTS scheme, being sort of their office junior, making tea, sorting the faxes, when we used to have fax machines. And then I ended up with a 6-month contract at Channel 4, and my job was moved into the legal and compliance department. And I thought, actually, maybe I can look at studying something. I don't know if anyone will take me. I haven't got any A-levels. But luckily my business admin MBQ that I did on the YTS allowed me to sort of get into back. So I did my LLB there, and then my LPC at the University of Law. So yeah, it was a very squiggly route, and not the kind of easiest of journeys, but that was me.
Thank you, Amelia. Now, Sunita, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself? But I'd also be interested to hear what your general observations are about, you know, how D&I stands in the city or in commercial law compared to, you know, when you initially started doing your consultancy work.
Yes, so I'll start with me first. So
Sure.
I actually started my career after uni in TV, fashion and media.
Oh, another TV connection.
Exactly. So and so it's great to actually hear everyone else's introductions, because I can absolutely resonate with different things. I went to a comprehensive. My year for A-levels was the last year who decided to do A-levels. So we were quite keen actually to move out of our town. I didn't grow up in a very diverse town, so I think that was something that was definitely pulling me towards London. And I then, after doing my stint in media, I actually wanted to do something that felt a little bit more stable. And I did my master's in HR management, and my first role was at Aviva Investors. So that was quite a big jump, making that transition from media to the corporate world. And then 5 years later, I faced redundancy, which was quite scary, because it was my first ever kind of grown-up job, shall I say. And then I basically ended up at my first law firm, which was amazing, because they didn't care that I didn't have previous law firm experience. And then since then, I've ended up being at other law firms for the last 15 years. And then in 2016, I went out on my own to launch my own consultancy. And since then, I've been working with law firms. However much I try and branch out, I keep coming back. So interestingly, if you think about the corporate sector in general, I think compared to when I started my career over 20 years ago, I'm now in my mid-40s. Things are definitely more diverse. I was very much the only person of even sometimes South Asian heritage in the corporate world. Interestingly, throughout my career, I've progressed, which I'm really proud of, and I've also sat on executive teams at law firms. But I do tend to be one of the few females on the leadership teams, and usually the only person of basically a brown heritage, South Asian heritage. So that's always been quite interesting. So I think even though lots of organisations are more diverse with regards to ethnicity, LGBTQ+, social mobility and ability, disability and gender, there's still a long way for a lot of places to go. So I think I'm glad that we're all talking about it today. And I love that Hasna has asked the question, you know, are we the right fit?
Yeah, no, and the reason I asked that was because, you know, I, as someone who has no professionals in my family and being the first person in my family to go to university, I very quickly started questioning whether I was the sort of right fit. And that still played on my mind, even during my training contract. And then you've got that combined with people quite openly telling me that you're disabled, you can't be a lawyer, you know, and you begin to then have self-doubts about whether or not you can do this. Did anyone else experience self-doubts or negative sort of feedback around themselves because of what, you know, because of your heritage or, you know, your diverse background? I'm seeing a few nods. Rodwell, what were people saying to you?
I think it's weird because there are different levels to the challenge or the hurdle that people would put in front of me. So on one level, there was a sort of it's a very competitive field, and if you're a first generation immigrant, in the sense that like I was on the plane with my parents when we came here, I think in many ways you're not trying to take too many risks in terms of trying to go and put yourself in a place where you would have to be the first, or that there isn't somebody who can go before you and give you the example and sort of tell you how it goes. You can kind of aim for something a little bit slightly more achievable, as it were, because there are people that we know in the family and friends of family who have those kinds of jobs. So on one level, there was that kind of hurdle where it was like, it sounds like a really nice job to have, but it sounds like it would be a risk because, you know, we don't have anybody that you could speak to that could show you the ropes in terms of how to get into this whole law thing. And then the other side of things was also being very aware of the fact that the image that I had in my head whenever I thought of a lawyer was just a tall white man. I didn't actually know any corporate lawyers or commercial lawyers or lawyers that worked in the city that looked anything like me. Not just in terms of like people from Zimbabwe, but black men, black women. I didn't know any. I couldn't think of a single example. So that on its own then created that barrier in my own mind before anybody said anything.
And Robert, you had already said that you weren't sure whether, you know, you as a gay male with, you know, Jedward-esque hairstyles, whether you would be taken seriously, whether, you know, you could ever get a training contract with a firm like Skadden, which, you know, is quite conservative in some parts.
Yeah, I definitely know when I first was thinking about doing law, the first thing for me was just, I'm just too old. I remember that distinctly being, you know, I've come into the game too late. You know, it's just never going to happen. And when I kind of got over that barrier, then it was just, I'm just too gay. And that sounds really weird, but that was a genuine concern, especially when it was coming kind of to the corporate side of things, because I felt that in my head, the image I had of a corporate lawyer was, you know, quite straight-laced and straight, really. And sort of similar to what Rodwell was saying just there, from my perspective, I'd never come across a gay partner. And actually, the first gay partner I came across was in Skadden, and he was also an Irish man. And I think I've spoken to you about this before, Hasnara. I just was really inspired by him and his story, and he was having a family. And there were just so many things about him that I thought, wow, that's sort of the person I wanted to meet. And actually, funny enough, I know you said Skadden's quite conservative, but when I did my vacation scheme there, it was actually during Pride Month, and the firm were doing so much around Pride. We had, talks, we had a Pride quiz, we had speakers come in that I thought, wow, this is part of the everyday life in the firm, as well as obviously all the work, that I just immediately felt, all my preconceptions of what a professional corporate lawyer was or is, suddenly fell apart. So yeah, I think sometimes the image that we see for externally isn't necessarily how it works, but then there's always that question about whether firms are doing enough to, I guess, communicate the message. I didn't really feel, I see myself, if you like, until I got into the firm.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So it was that sort of, the messaging that they were putting out to future recruits that it's actually fine to be different. But what really jumps out for me is the fact that, you took your own initiative to identify your own role models, because if they're not being put on a trolley and placed in front of you, I think, because it's weird, isn't it? Because I have a love-hate relationship with nepotism. On the one hand, I think that, it is about the old boys network and a case of who you know, etc. But I really think that social media and the various D&I initiatives that law firms are offering through organisations like Aspiring Solicitors, Rare Recruitment, etc., that there is no reason why someone from a non-traditional background cannot network and form their own sort of list of contacts who can offer them a bit of mentoring. Amelia, did you get involved you must have got involved in some internal networking to get yourself noticed within Channel 4?
Yeah, I think I can really understand what Robert's saying. So my boss, when I joined Channel 4, he was somebody that came to law sort of later in life as well. He'd previously been sort of a trade union man. I think he'd been a lorry driver as well. And
Wow.
I just loved that. I loved the fact that, somebody who had such a diverse sort of background and was, like wasn't all about, didn't go skiing, or that was the one thing that I had in my head, was that I've never been skiing. I still have never been skiing, but that all lawyers did stuff on the ski slopes, and it was all a little bit like that. But Neil was nothing like that. Like I said, he was an ex-lorry driver, trade union man, and then did a training contract. And so I think that's when I first was like, oh, okay, so normal people can do this too. This isn't about just people who went to Oxbridge and people who, have connections. You can just come into it and do night school and, find your way. So yeah, very much like Robert said, someone who is like me. Obviously, I can barely drive. I'm not a great driver. I definitely can drive a lorry, but I felt an affinity with him, and he was like a really big advocate of mine, and really championed me so that I could sort of get my qualifications. So I absolutely wouldn't have been able to do it without him.
Yeah. You mentioned the phrase affinity, and of course, affinity bias is a form of unconscious bias. So let's get our D&I expert in, because I want to have a discussion around unconscious bias, because I think if you're aware of what it is, I know that it's a bit controversial because some people think that unconscious bias training doesn't work, etc., etc. But I've actually started looking at unconscious bias in a way that is probably a little bit controversial, in that I can use it to my advantage as well if I know what it is. And affinity bias is that perfect one, because what Robert did was basically reach out to someone who's gay and Irish, and that is affinity bias. So that partner took you under his wings. And I think that on the face of it, it's a bad thing, because you shouldn't ever favor someone because they are similar to you, because it puts people who have lots of replicas of themselves out there at a bit of an advantage. But Sunita, what are your thoughts on unconscious bias, just to help students understand what it is and how it can manifest itself in the context of recruitment and more generally in the workplace?
Yes, it's an interesting one, definitely. I think around 3 years ago, I decided not to use unconscious bias because I feel that the people who I was delivering training to, or like awareness sessions or skills training, we were all professionals, we were all intellectual, we were all grown-ups. And it's important for people just to talk about bias, because I felt that when people were talking about unconscious bias, it was like a reason kind of / an excuse. And actually, if we work on our awareness, and that's where actually I think I agree with you, Hasnara, actually awareness training is really important, because people might not be able to build that awareness in other areas of their lives or the workplace. So bias should just be a general awareness piece, and it's important to recognize. And I was running a session today actually for one of my law firms, and I said, you know, we all have biases.
Agreed.
It's human nature. The way that the brain works from a neuroscience perspective is that our brain is like an encyclopedia of experiences, and it tends to go to that part of the brain, and we have to kind of energize the other part of the brain to question ourselves and think, actually, is that my bias? So we all make assumptions about people. Again, that's a very natural thing, and that's every ethnicity does that. So it's not just the majority who could be of white heritage, for example. So I think unconscious bias is an interesting one. I think it's important that people understand the different kinds of biases. And I think affinity bias is interesting, because if you think about the recruitment process, you know, there's been so much research about how people tend to kind of warm to people who they can either relate to or they have something in common, but that can also be a visible difference as well that they have in common. But then you can also warm to people once you start speaking to them. So if I was interviewing any of the panelists, I'll be like, oh my gosh, yes, I've done work with Stephen Lawrence Day Foundation, or I've done work in TV and fashion. So you immediately build those connections, but you need to make sure that your bias is not influencing your decision making in a negative way. Yep. So it's not clouding all of your decision making. And I think that's what the fear is sometimes with bias, that decisions aren't made factoring lots of other things, like somebody's potential, what experience someone's bringing, what someone's life experience. Even if I think of Amelia, and so many of us are mental health advocates, you know, we bring that life experience to our work. So I hope that helps, Hasnara. But
it does indeed.
I try and avoid using the unconscious bit, and I talk about conscious bias, if anything, just so people feel a little bit more responsible.
Yep. And I also like your reference to assumptions, because we all do make assumptions. And I think that assumptions that students make sometimes could be, oh, I can't possibly email that partner because what do I have in common with him or her? I can't possibly apply to that firm because I didn't go to Oxbridge. So I think bias in that way can be quite self-limiting, because don't try to predict the outcome of an unsolicited approach via LinkedIn. Don't rule a conversation out with someone because you worry they're too senior or too important. Because one of the things I found, even as a 40-something-year-old, professional who's worked in the city for my entire career, that I find white male privilege a little bit intimidating, and I find talking to male partners a little bit scary. So I can imagine if you're a 19, 20-year-old, black female, or someone from a less privileged background, you may think, what could I possibly have in common with that person? And therefore I can't strike a conversation with them. And I cannot stress enough the importance of just putting yourself out there and, to network. Because if I had to share one piece of careers advice with all the students listening in on this event, is the importance of networking. But I think self-limiting beliefs and assumptions can hold us back when it comes to networking and putting ourselves out there and developing a bigger network, as does inclusive behaviour. Now, Sunita, what's inclusive behaviour and how can that impact networking?
So if I think about inclusive behaviour, and I love defining things, so thank you, Hasnara, because I never like to assume we all see words in the same way. But for me, inclusive behaviour is bringing different people into the conversation. Exactly. I think when I've been at different kind of corporate conferences throughout my years, and I've been that person who I haven't felt included in conversations, even if I go and stand with a group of people. And I think, you know, that's not inclusive. It's kind of being alert to actually, how can we introduce people? How can we bring people into the conversation? How can we show that we're interested in them?
Yeah.
How can we truly listen as well? And so I think with social media, it is really good because you can reach out, you can effectively network. And now, obviously, because of the pandemic, a lot of networking is happening online.
Yeah.
So there are different ways of doing it. But I think in terms of being inclusive, it's also not judging somebody. Yeah. Again, being aware of your assumptions, and also be aware of the assumptions in the questions you might ask somebody. So if I was to meet Robert for the first time, you know, I wouldn't necessarily make assumptions in my questions about him, or because, you know, for example, if someone's got an Irish accent, then I would assume, no, they've only just, you know, they haven't lived here very long, you know, in England. So it's quite important to think inclusively, and it takes practice for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, my relationship with Robert pretty much sums up inclusive behaviour, because on paper, what would a 40-something-year-old Asian female have in common with a gay Irish man? And if I had decided, or if Robert had decided, actually, we don't have anything in common, then he would never have, you know, got to know me. Would you agree, Robert?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I always, like, I mean, I like to think that I'm a bit of an extrovert, and I just love talking to people and meeting people. And, you know, when you first reached out to me, I can't exactly remember what you said, but whatever happened, we had a Zoom call and that was it. We just sort of took off because people have interesting stories. And I guess that's the journalist in me. And, you know, it's wonderful to think that if you could just strip it back, we're all just human beings with, you know, interesting stories. And, you know, we obviously, I find the bias stuff really, really interesting, because as everyone was saying, we do have so many biases, but if you can work through them and if you can get past them, the world is just such an amazing place. The people you meet, the stories they have, you know, the experiences, it's, you know, yes, we are two polar opposites, I guess, in so many ways, but we're good friends. And I just think that's amazing. And it all happened via Zoom and LinkedIn, I guess.
Exactly. So it just goes to show that you don't even need to meet someone in person to strike a rapport. The key is, as you know, Sunita said, you know, think about the assumptions that underlie anything that you might ask them, and have that sort of mindset where you're going to get to know people, and that will really help all aspiring lawyers to cultivate a network of really helpful people with whom you have meaningful reciprocal relationships, because it is my pet topic, networking. Now let's go back to fit, because the other thing that I think of, and I think fitting in as a lawyer, is authenticity. Okay. And what I experienced when I was a trainee was, you know, I rocked up to a Magic Circle law firm, and I looked around, and back in the day there weren't people that looked like me in the trainee cohort I was in, and I had a real crisis as to who I wanted to become, you know, because would the girl from the hood in Luton ever fit in to a city law firm? You know, I wasn't in my Harvey Nicks, you know, suit. I you know, certainly didn't go skiing in Val d'Isere, and I do not drink alcohol. So, you know, I found the social events that centered around things like wine tasting, etc., were completely alien to me, as was my first client event that I was invited to, which was wine tasting and a tour of the Linklater's arts collection. Okay. And it got me thinking, you know, do I need to change to fit into the environment, or does the environment need to change to meet my expectations and my needs, sort of thing? It's a bit of a sensitive topic because I think work needs to be done on both sides, because that's what really creating an inclusive workplace involved. But before I ask Sunita to explain what that means in a bit more detail, has anyone else experienced a crisis of who they are? Rodwell, you're about to pounce. Go on.
No, I was just sort of thinking about what it was like when I sort of first arrived in the city, because you know I went from Derby to Birmingham, and I thought Birmingham was a big place. It's quite exciting looking around, going, oh, this is, you know, if I manage to like end up at that firm over there, I've made it. Like mum and dad will be proud. I'll have money to buy myself things that I've always wanted to buy. I'll be okay. And then I came to the city, and you know I'm seeing how busy everything is, and I noticed there was a sort of uniform almost. And Hasnara and I have talked about this. I actually have one now, a gilet, but um, but I just noticed like everybody's wearing gilets, everybody's got like colorful socks and loafers on. And more recently, I've noticed everybody's wearing, like, there's a specific brand of trainer. I don't know what the name of the trainer company is called, but it's got like a V on the side, and this is just what people wear when they're here. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm just not this person. This isn't who I am. But I think there's a way in which you can sort of be your most professional self, you know, wear a suit, dress as best you can on your way into work, without necessarily feeling like, well, now I have to get that specific trainer, now I have to go break the bank and buy a gilet from whatever company everyone else has got one. I just happen to like the gilet, so I've got one now. But there's definitely a lot that goes into the mind of a young person. I'll call us all young people, because we're all young at heart. When you step into an environment and everybody else seems to sort of know something that you don't about how to move and how to behave in that environment, it's as if everybody had a conversation beforehand about, this is the outfit we're going to wear today, and this is how we're going to walk, and these are the words we use. I hear a lot of people use the word peace, and I remember hearing somebody say, oh yeah, like when we talk about the diversity piece, and I thought, I've never used the word peace in that context, but that's just how people in the city talk. And there are some instances where it kind of just becomes a part of the way I speak, because it's how best to relate to the people I'm around. But I don't ever think you should dilute yourself and your authenticity.
Agreed. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, what I've done is embraced the best bits of all the worlds that I've encountered, sort of thing. Amelia, how did you find it at Channel 4? Because I'm assuming that it's quite a diverse organisation anyway.
Yeah, no, it is. But I can really relate, like at sort of the beginning of my career, it's that feeling like everyone has like nicer clothes than you, and like I would like buy my clothes from like Asda and stuff, and to be fair, I still do, because actually I quite like their clothes. And I think it's about kind of embracing that authenticity. And like I was on a set like a few months ago, and like one of the senior managers at E4 said, oh, I like your trousers, and I automatically went, oh, I got them from Tesco's. And I feel like I'm quite proud of that now, and I'm happy to say that, and I'm not embarrassed of it. And I think with age and sort of probably part of it is sort of being at Channel 4 as well, and people just not being snobby. There's not that feeling of oh, I would never shop in a supermarket, I only shop at Waitrose and they don't do clothes. It's not like that at all. So actually you can feel quite proud of, oh, I've got these here a bargain, and actually you got 20% off with this, you know. Whereas I think when I started out my career, like particularly with at sort of News International, I just didn't feel like that. I didn't have a designer handbag. I couldn't afford it. And I didn't have the clothes that other people did. So yeah, I think it is that part of kind of getting older and just realizing who you are, and actually you don't want to be that person who, because you're not kind of a cardboard cutout of somebody else. You are who you are.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to recognise that there is a code, but it's, as Rodwell said, it's almost like a uniform. And I think that with the progression that law firms are making in regard to creating inclusive cultures, that there seems to be more of a celebration of the different cultures and backgrounds that people can bring to the workplace. Would you agree, Sunita?
I think so. And, you know, if I think about dress code and how that's changed over the last 20 years in the corporate sector, and when I started, you would absolutely wear a suit to work. And I can remember at one of my first law firms, I wore a bright coloured top because I was lucky to have had coaching before I moved into that role. And the coach said to me, what will make you really happy about yourself, or what will make you feel confident on your first day? And I said, you know, wearing something bright, you know, because I love wearing bright clothes. And it was interesting because I can remember the first day and somebody said, oh, we don't really wear bright colours around here.
Wow.
We don't really wear bright colours in law firms. And so I was like horrified with my choice of style for my first day, thinking, oh no, you know, they're really, you know, I've done the wrong thing. But I kind of worked with that a bit. And I think at the end of the day, I stood out anyway. So because of my ethnicity and the colour of my skin. And so I kind of worked with that. And interestingly, what I wear at work, or what I wear in general, is incredibly important to me. And I'm always known now when I work with different law firms, either my earrings, my big bold earrings, or my brightly coloured shoes.
Yeah,
and I will get the managing partners of law firms commenting on how nice my shoes are. And I just think, you know what, that's really nice that they've noticed that. But I think it's hard because when you're starting out in your career, I think there's a balance. And I think it's easy for people to say, you know, you just be yourself. But actually, I think we need to be realistic. I think we need to adapt ourselves sometimes. What I might wear to an interview or a pitch meeting now would definitely be more myself, but I will be dressing for the firm as well, because this is the first time people are going to meet me, whether it's in person or via online meetings. And so it's important that I create that right impression. So I think it's about getting the right balance as well, making sure that you're comfortable. But if you can bring in a little bit of yourself, I think that's wonderful. And I think, again, the corporate sector is changing now. We're used to seeing so much visible difference. You know, if we think about just the way that fashion has gone, you know, fashion has also impacted how men dress in corporate firms, not just women, or people who identify as female or male. So I think it's definitely different. But I think you do have to think about how you adapt yourself as well.
Agreed. And I guess, Rodwell, that all the men are now wearing gilets, aren't they, by the sounds of it? Before I ask Robert about his hair, is your gilet a Ralph Lauren one? Because I think, is that the one that you were going to get?
Well, I opted for a non-designer gilet.
Get
because
you,
I didn't want to break the bank. I just got this money, so I thought what I'll probably do is I'll just get one from Zara, and it does the job. It sort of it fits the uniform, but I don't have to necessarily play by the rules of, oh, I only shop at this shop or I only shop at that shop.
I have to say that so much is the pressure of fitting in. You know, Amelia, you mentioned designer handbags. I have to say that I did get one because I felt that everyone around me had one, and that was definitely peer pressure amongst the trainees in my intake. Robert, what about your hair? Come on. Do you think you'll change it before you start your training contract, or are you proud to have it look like that? And are you owning your sexuality and saying, this is me? A bit like Sunita and her earrings.
Yeah, no, I think at this stage I've got the training contract and they've seen the hair. So I think I did have longer roots probably, but no, I think at this stage the hair it's gonna stick. And I think, you know, I think funny thing is, I mean, this would be the most, if you like, controversial I go, because my hairdresser Bless her, she's definitely not on this call, but she's amazing. And she's always pushing me, let's go pink and let's go orange and let's go, she really wants me to just go out there, and she always wants to get the same hairstyle as me. And I'm always telling her, I work in law, like I can't. But who knows, maybe in 3 or 4 years the sector will have moved on and I can actually have pink hair. But I do think for me, people talk about wearing bright clothes or what makes you feel confident, and my hair is really important to me, and it's always been really important to me. And it does, I do feel more confident when my hair is the way I like it, but it's absolutely a concern for me. And I knew going into interviews that people would look at my hair and that they would think, they just wouldn't take me serious, or they would immediately assume I was gay, and then all of the sort of associations or preconceptions of being gay would come with my hair. And people do, I think the percentage of people who go back into the closet when they have their first job is extremely high. And so there's almost no hiding, because there is a lot of people will hide. And I know, maybe I'm old and bold enough to know that I just couldn't do a job if I had to hide who I am. At this stage, at least in my career. So, if you don't like the hair, sack it. If you weren't going to offer me a training contract because I have blonde hair, it's not even that controversial. That's, then I wouldn't have wanted, to work in that place. But everyone always comments on my hair, and I think I've got to the stage where, I don't care. I genuinely don't care. It's just the only thing I sometimes think is, are they thinking of my hair, or are they thinking of my sexuality? And you slightly alluded to it there, but we've had this conversation before. I don't mind if you think about my hair, but I'm wondering, does that mean you're thinking about I'm gay? And then you want to ask other questions. But yeah.
And then I'll, commit a microaggression and tell you that I've got a gay friend who's after a partner, and I'd like to introduce you both to each other, sort of thing. The reason I'm bringing up microaggressions, Sunita unfortunately is going to leave in a minute, but the questions come in from Ibrahim. By the way, we'll now invite questions. We've got 15 minutes left. This is such a big topic, diversity and inclusivity, but I wanted to talk about microaggressions because it's come in from Ibrahim, who's just asking, how do we deal with microaggressions? And Sunita, do you have time just to explain what one is before you head off, please?
Absolutely. And I can stick around for 10 minutes, Asnara, so hopefully that helps.
Okay,
Yes, so microaggressions are basically unhelpful behaviours, comments, gestures, actions, which the person communicating the microaggression might assume it's nothing, or it might have been done with a positive intention, or they didn't mean any harm. But whether that microaggression is experienced once or twice or nearly every day you're going to work, or whenever you're in a certain social space, it can basically eat away at your confidence. It can create a feeling of potentially isolation, heightening that you are different in any way, whether it's an invisible difference or a visible difference. It basically doesn't feel great. And interestingly,
Well, I was going to ask the panelists whether they've got examples. I'll start, if I may. So the ones that I get are, "You're so brave," because I've got a job and I'm in a wheelchair. The other one that I get is, "Wow, I love your skin color. I wish I was born with a tan." And then the other one is, "I hope you've got a driver's license for your wheelchair." All of those things sound completely harmless, but when you hear them more than once, as Sunita said, it can really start to irritate you. Rodwell, have you experienced any?
Yeah, I think interestingly, and I think maybe this is just a positive about the environment that I'm working in, not whilst I've been at Freshfields. Most of the ones I can remember are from when I was younger, either at school or I think most of them were at school or in like other contexts outside of work. And a lot of them have to do with like people thinking that because they've gone on holiday and they've tanned very lightly, they are somehow darker than or at the same level of tan as I am. And it's like, well, that's a tan. This is just how I am all the time. And it's just it's a very interesting conversation. I try not to take it offensively because a lot of people say those things out of ignorance, and I try to turn that into a conversation where they can sort of understand how it sounds.
Good. Yeah.
Because I think at the same time, if I make that person defensive, that conversation doesn't go anywhere. But if we have a conversation about like, did you realize that this is how it sounded to me? Maybe I can make a friend who then doesn't offend the next person.
Yeah, really good point there. Thank you for that. Robert, have you experienced microaggressions other than the ones committed by me towards you?
And please don't stress about that. You know, one that I used to always guess, and this it's almost not a microaggression now, but I guess it still is, but I'm sure you've or heard of at least RuPaul's Drag Race. And I remember before I ever started watching RuPaul's Drag Race, I was quite late to the game, I was always getting Yas Queen to me. People would Yas Queen me for like as a sort of a I've done something good, but I never really understood it. So I thought they were, because I just literally didn't watch the show, so I thought they were calling me a queen, but more like as queen, queer, like a princess sort of thing. Now I get it a little bit more, but still I can see it's sort of like the assumption you're gay, so you watch RuPaul's Drag Race. I do actually watch it now, so hands up. But yeah, there'd be just certain things, you know, that people will assume because you're gay you like, and I do like Britney Spears, or you like, you know, lots of other things, and so conversations sometimes do go down get very one note. But then I also think sometimes it depends on the person, because sometimes I'll allow, you know, I will bring up RuPaul's Drag Race, or I'll bring up Britney Spears, and then, you know, the conversation goes a certain way, but I've kind of directed it that way, and I've made it very clear I'm very happy to talk about those things, or, you know, it's almost more comfortable for me in that sense because I've introduced the subject.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, both the point that Rodwell and Robert made, which is, you know, and which I hope answers the question about how do you manage this, is, you know, I do the same, which is, you know, it's all about context, isn't it? The relationship you've got with the individual. But it's also, you know, a education in that I do now flag it if it bothers me, but without making the other person feel really awful about themselves, because I do think that, you know, it's important to educate others, because they will then be thankful, I think, further down the line, because I think, you know, they're more likely to then not do it, and you will have opened their eyes a bit, personally. I mean, Sunita, what would be the sort of official advice when being on the receiving end of a microaggression?
I'm afraid, everybody, there isn't any official advice. And I think, Hasnara, you're right. You've got to think about the context, how well you know the person who has communicated a microaggression or a non-inclusive piece of behaviour. And you know, you can, if you're in the workplace and you don't feel comfortable to say something, you do need to go and flag it to somebody else who might be in a more confident position or a senior position to say something, or just that you've experienced that and it's made you feel uncomfortable. And I think one of the first things that you can do, if you are willing to have that conversation with somebody, and interestingly, I had to do this at the school gates recently. So I went around the corner, got to the gate, and because of the pandemic, they bring the children up to the gate, and the after school club teacher basically said, "Oh, your mummy's here now." And I looked down at the child, and can you guess if that child was mine or not?
No, of course not, but because it had the same skin color, presumably.
That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I was just shocked. And firstly, I have two daughters, so you know, and I just said, you know, I'm not his mum, and I'm afraid you really can't say that. And even the little boy was like, "That's not my mum," you know. So I was really glad that he kind of stood up. And I think sometimes we need to think about how children actually navigate things like this in the playground. And they would say something and say, "Stop, I don't like it." But obviously, as grown-ups, we can't necessarily put the hand up and do that. But we can say, you know, what you've just said, I appreciate there might have been different intentions, but I would actually prefer that you use this language, or that you didn't refer to that, and explain why. And you don't have to go into your life story or anything, but you can, if you can share the impact of what they've said, but also help them in terms of allyship as well. A lot of people need our help because we are either stronger, more knowledgeable allies, like all of these panelists, or we have different lived experiences. So help them and explain to them what can they do differently next time.
Yeah, and I think in a sort of non-confrontational way is really important. And I think that will then help remove that awkwardness, because there is that awkwardness I've found that people sometimes display, especially in the context of meeting someone with a disability. You know, do I ask them whether they need help? Do I take their coat for them? And I actually just put the person at ease by just saying, yeah, it's absolutely fine. And I'll give you a really stark example of this. I went for a lunch at a law firm in their client dining room, okay? And the waiter actually asked me if I needed help cutting my food up, okay? And I was thinking, when I explained this story, they were like, what? Someone asked you that do you need your food cutting up? And I was like, well, I actually did. So I just said, yes, please. I could have just kicked up a fuss saying, how dare you suggest that in front of my clients? You know, you've made me feel really embarrassed. And I think in that situation, you just have to be pragmatic and sensible. And I think the other person was, the waiter was genuinely trying to be helpful. And that's what I mean about context. Okay, we're running out of time. So I want to cover imposter syndrome, because that's now come up as a question as well, which is, what advice would you give for dealing with imposter syndrome in a professional environment? Who wants to go for that one? I'm not going to assume that anyone's experienced it.
I'm happy to quickly add something on this because I do a lot of work on it.
Go on.
Imposter syndrome. So just remember that whoever you're working with, they have probably suffered from imposter syndrome at some point. And you've got to remember why you're there and what your purpose is. It's there to do a job. You're there because you've got particular skills, expertise, or you've trained, or you've studied, or you've got the right work experience or the right attitude. And that's what you actually need to focus on, because otherwise, if you let imposter syndrome affect you too much, basically no one else is going to look after that. You've got to be in charge of that. So you have got to give yourself a really good positive talking to.
My response to imposter syndrome is, yes, I experienced it and had a really bad case of it. And it's very prevalent amongst high achieving individuals, so lawyers. And even, you know, you've got celebrities talking about it. I know, for example, Lady Gaga has talked about it, even Albert Einstein, who's not a celebrity, but obviously a historic figure. And I was running a session on imposter syndrome earlier today, and I played a really powerful clip from Michelle Obama. And if you, do any of you know the singer Anne-Marie? See, I'm quite cool and with it, you know, I'm youthful. She's got a great book called You Deserve Better. And the reason I know this is because I listened to a clip of it on Audible, and she talks about imposter syndrome. So if you want to find out more about it, then do have a listen to that. But how does it manifest itself? It's that horrible feeling of, I got here by fluke, I don't deserve a seat at the table. And I certainly experienced that, because people would jokingly say, Hustara, you only got a training contract because you're disabled, female and Asian, sort of thing. And at the time it felt funny, but now looking back, I cringe, sort of thing. Have any of the guests experienced it?
Yeah, I definitely, I think, you know, it's not something that I think goes away either easily. I think there are times that it still sort of, it comes up. And I think I have to remind myself that I am not perfect at everything. There will be people that are better in certain areas than I am, and just need to own what I'm good at, and where it's really difficult. I think it's a real challenge, and you have to, I find myself having to kind of battle it, and give myself that talking to, that Sunita was talking about, you know, having that conversation with myself that, you know, actually you got here because you worked hard for it, and you didn't, you know, they're not just giving it to you because they think you're a nice person. If you're crap, you wouldn't be here. And just that, having those conversations with myself, that, you know, and talking myself out of it. But I think that's a really good point that you raised, Sunita, that actually a lot of people struggle with it, and a lot of people that I know do. And I think that's really important to recognise, that it's not you just thinking it. There'll be, you know, that person across the office and one of your friends and everyone else will as well.
Yeah, the training session I ran was for some trainees earlier today, and pretty much every single one of them said they've experienced it or they know someone within their professional network who has experienced it. I could talk about imposter syndrome, I'm sure Sunita could, for the rest of the evening, but we've only got about 4 minutes left. So another question came about, I wanted to sort of end with, which is not a question for the audience, but something that I feel I did really well in terms of navigating my entry into law, which is to own my disability, to use what makes me different as an asset, you know, to turn it into an asset and to demonstrate how, you know, my disability gave me sort of determination, resilience, all of that stuff. How did, you know, I just wanted to wrap up this evening's very, very interesting chat with each of the sort of guests saying how they converted, you know, something negative relating to their background into a positive, you know, to really hit the nail on the head in terms of inspiring our audience to do the same. Rodwell, do you want to start?
Sure thing. I think one of the things that I once I understood has been super helpful is knowing that in most cases, your unique background story, number one, you're not necessarily the only person who has a certain characteristic about themselves. In some cases you are. For example, you might be the only disabled person or the only Black person or the only whatever other characteristic you have. But in some instances, there are some people whose experiences, at least in some way, resemble yours. But I think that the key thing that I found really helpful is seeing the fact that everything about you is actually really interesting to people that aren't you.
True.
Like super interesting, especially like now that I'm, you know, at Freshfields, I thought that partners would be really unapproachable, really scary people. But, you know, I put some time in the diary to have a conversation with a partner. We were just supposed to catch up about the work, and we ended up talking about Zimbabwe for like an hour, because that's something I know a lot about, and it's something that he was willing to be interested in. And I think when you own something about yourself and you become the expert on that thing about you that's super interesting becomes something that can be used in conversation to help expand your network. So
Yeah.
I really suggest that people really own themselves in terms of everything about yourself, become an expert on all those interesting things about yourself, and present them to people, because they will find them interesting.
Agreed. I think everyone's life story is interesting. It's how you tell the story that makes the difference. Okay, so think about the language you're going to use to describe it. And I think with regard to, you know, not people say, well, my background isn't that exciting. I don't come from Zimbabwe. You know, I just come from a regular household in an inner city sort of part of London, blah, blah, blah. But what I've also done is, and this goes back to inclusive behavior and diversity of thought, I've surrounded myself by diverse people. I live vicariously through them. And if I don't have a story about myself, I'm quite happy to share someone else's story and borrow that for an evening, you know. So it might be like, I've not been there, but you know what? I was talking to someone recently who'd been there, and they gave me a fascinating account of what it's like to be in Iceland, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I think that's where the diversity of thought piece really works. Robert, what about you? What did you turn into a positive, a challenge or a negative that happened in your life?
Yeah, slightly different, I guess. I think the biggest challenge I've ever come over, and it is linked to my sexuality, but it was that I was diagnosed with anorexia when I was 19, and so I dropped
Wow.
out of college.
Wow.
And that sort of set, and I was in hospital for just almost a year, and then kind of lived through college with bulimia and anorexia. But that was one of the most difficult things I've ever dealt with, but also has literally turned my life around, because the self-awareness and the resilience I got from overcoming an eating disorder, I truly believe is the reason I am where I am today. And, you know, sometimes, what is it, you know, it puts everything in perspective. You know, when you're having a tough time, nothing will ever be as tough as that was. And also, there's so much power in being able to speak about it openly, because it was something that was so secretive, that I love being able to speak about it now, and I love being able to, be an advocate for mental health and get involved in mental health initiatives. I've done mental health first aid training, and when you talk about it, other people, everybody has mental health, and the conversations that you can have with people when you're open about your own mental health, it's just amazing. You get to meet people and understand people on such a different on another level. And I did talk about my eating disorder quite openly in my applications to law firms, and it actually came up in some of my interviews, and partners were genuinely interested. And because I introduced the subject, it was almost like it wasn't a taboo.
And that's the key, isn't it? I think that, again, about not making people feel awkward around you, is you set the parameters of what you're comfortable talking about. And like you, with mentioning your sort of eating disorder, I was really open about my disability on applications, and I in fact I've posted something on the chat there, which I encourage you all to read if you want to know how to turn a negative life experience into a positive. But I owned it, and I said that on training contract application forms, you've got that classic describing your biggest achievement to date. And you'll see if you read the blog that I've just posted that I used my disability and how I overcame the challenges that threw at me as my biggest achievement. And you know what? That sounds far more exciting than some of the things I've seen on application forms. So yeah, Amelia, how about you?
Well, actually, part of my job at Channel 4 is sort of doing duty of care for contributors. So that falls under the Ofcom code. And I love it. I love reading, psych reports. I love, discussing contributors. I've been on probably half the medication that some of them have been. I know that so well because I was, I experienced it myself. So I found that, I can really understand a lot of those things and a lot of things and can really sort of know what questions to ask about, and of course, with television, we shouldn't be precluding people who've experienced mental health or have any disabilities, because we should be representing the people that watch. But it's about being sort of careful and making sure that we do that properly and in a supportive way. So I found that with this whole area that it's really, it's my niche. I can really understand it, and so yeah, that's where I've kind of really turned it into a positive.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I'm afraid we're out of time, but what an absolutely brilliant and fascinating discussion. Thank you everyone for sharing your stories and experiences. Sunita had to head off for childcare duties, so thank you also to Sunita, and obviously to our audience. And hopefully, as I said, the point of this discussion this evening was really just to offer some inspiration to you all. That I was interviewing a partner the other day, and she said something really interesting, which is, don't rule yourself out. That's someone else's job. So don't talk yourself out of filling in an application form for a job. That's the recruitment person's decision. And have faith in your own ability. Own your difference. Be inclusive. Develop and cultivate a diverse network, and it will help you to learn new things. You'll become a more interesting person for it. You will stay fresh and relevant, and that's what gets you noticed in a competitive jobs market. So, there you go. Is that what's the Ethan symbol? Is that a thank you? I think that stands for thank you. But anyway, look, good night, everyone.
Applause. Applause.
Is it an applause? Thank you, Ethan. Look, if you've enjoyed this session, then feel free to talk about it on social media. You're really keen to promote Cheeky Little Careers, and I'm sure BARBRI are keen to do the same, who have very kindly sponsored this evening's chat. And best of luck to everyone who is in hot pursuit of qualifying work experience for a training contract. And hopefully our paths will meet again very soon. And if not, then maybe you'll bump into one of the panelists. Have a good evening, everyone. Take care. I'm going to go have some risotto now. Bye bye.